Oh, no, long
Am I
as you
crowding you? All right, all right.
we're gonna be
Just plug them in.
for both of
Charge
them.
them up.
And, you know, we got that executive thing first, so that the commissioners can come up to speed on it. And the public as well.
So is it going to be Hans from the county, and then is you know Dave Lawson? Is it Hans, and then not Dave Lawson, but county administrator?
Todd Lawson, and maybe, the president, what's his name? Peter?
We've got this at 11. We got this now.
Who is the president? I think that's
Are we ordering pizza?
And then we've got a 1 o'clock.
Which means we need.
Mike Vincent. And I'm not sure if he's gonna be there.
That's a
but
priority.
The financial director will be there,
okay.
you know, to
Yep.
point out anything. Okay, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting to order with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
And to the republic for which stands one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And could you, just for the record, make note that all 7 commissioners are present. Is there any correspondence? No correspondence. We'll move right on in to the, is there anybody from the public that would like to comment? And please come up to the microphone and state your name and address, please.
My name is Robert Streimer. I live at 153 Henlopen Avenue, and I want to talk briefly about bamboo, because there's a bamboo ordinance on the agenda. I bought my house, this house I'm in now, 7 years ago, and I'm on Henlopen, and behind me is St. Michael's Place. So all the lots are 50 by 100, and there's an offset, so I have 2 neighbors behind me and 1 on each side. When I moved in, there was no bamboo in my yard. And then it would pop up every year in May, new growth. It would take me 5 minutes to clip the new growth, and then I was done for the year. After about 5 years, I decided I needed a better privacy hedge, as did my neighbors, and I let the bamboo grow within about 3 feet of the fence. And I continue to clip it so it stays within 3 feet. So I have a nice narrow border on my property. When I read the ordinance that someone who I do not know, who I assume is a resident and not chartered by the commissioners, put in a legislative proposal with detailed legislation and financial penalties for the citizens in this town who could be penalized for having bamboo on their own property, I felt concerned that this is something that the city did not need to get involved in. I have a very good friend and neighbor who is on the city's, one of the garden-related committees, and she is a lovely person and just adamant about the fact that there shouldn't be crepe myrtles in town, that it's not an indigenous tree and it shouldn't be here. So I just want to say, I think it's a mistake for the city to get involved in this kind of business when there's so many other more pressing issues on the front burner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, just FYI, Mr. Katz introduced himself to me earlier and indicated he wanted to make a presentation on bamboo during, and so I don't know whether this is the appropriate time or during the conversation, but I just wanted to point that
Well,
out.
that's what's on the agenda, and he's part of the agenda.
Okay.
So he will be with
Okay,
Dennis.
very good.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll close that off. The city manager's report, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. DelDOT has issued a traffic alert concerning bridge repairs, which will require the closure of State Road 1A, Silver Lake Drive. This will be occurring on Wednesday, this Wednesday, November 7th, 7 a.m. until 5 p.m. through Friday, November 30th, 2018, pending weather delays. DelDOT's contractor, Mumford and Miller, will be replacing the bridge joints, repairing the adjacent approach asphalt roadway, repairing the timber slab, and making minor concrete deck repairs on the bridge. Detour signage is posted. On October 29th, the City of Rehoboth Beach met with Denrex Coastal Programs Office and representatives from the engineering firms KCI and AECom to discuss the scope of work for the city's Resilient Community Partnership Grant. You'll recall that it's a grant that the city is leading the charge on. Both firms are in the process of creating proposals that will outline a partnership between the two firms for their consulting services. AECom will perform best practice research on impervious surfaces, and KCI will develop model ordinances for each municipality based on their findings. The city's Building and Licensing Department will hold a public information meeting for all building contractors. This will target the intake process for building, demolition, and tree applications. Will be held on Wednesday, November 14th, 10 a.m. to noon in City Hall here in the Commissioners' Room. The meeting will provide information on the building, demolition, and tree application process and how to gather information needed to prepare plans and permit applications, how to prepare and file permit applications, how the application will be processed, and the inspection requirements during construction. The Water Department continues with the water service connections on Park Avenue at 4th Street, working toward 3rd Street, and the work is scheduled to be completed by the end of the week. Of course, weather dependent. The citywide street paving contract has begun with the contractor beginning on Hickman Street between Scarborough Avenue and Stokely Street. And construction is underway on the 2nd Street sidewalk, and the demolition of the old sidewalk is complete. Contractor is replacing the curb this week. During construction activity, lane closures and limited parking and access will occur. The contractor, Clean Cut Pavers, makes every effort to minimize inconvenience during the construction period, and the actual construction time framework is about 60 days. The work continues from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. City Hall will be closed tomorrow, Tuesday, for Election Day, and Thursday, November 8th, from 12:30 to 4:30 for Returns Day. Residential trash collection remains on its regular schedule. In observance of Veterans Day, next Monday, November 12th, City Hall will be closed. There will not be trash pickup that day. Regular trash pickup will resume citywide on Tuesday, November 13th. Thank you.
I have a quick question for City Manager. Could you give us a really quick update on where we are with getting the consultant to look at our strategic telecommunications and wireless plan?
Yes, the IT director, Mr. Hamby, and I met last week with a firm, explained the scope of the work that is laid out and needed for them, and they expect to send us a proposal shortly.
Okay, great, thank you.
Also,
Firm, is that the one that we've already talked to with the 5? Which firm? Are we allowed to say?
yeah, the firm, Max, can you help me with the name of it? Big Wireless, yeah.
Wireless.
And we're starting today our live streaming, so for those watching us on television, hello. But we have started that project today, so thank you.
City Manager, on the Silver Lake Bridge closing, just a question I had. It applies to pedestrian traffic as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Great. Solicitor's report, please.
Only thing to report, Mr. Mayor, is in the Beach Walk case. I know that Max Walton, who's representing the city commissioners, and this is for the benefit of the public, has filed the opening brief on the city's motion to dismiss. So that's happened. That briefing is going to occur now over the next 45 days, and then it'll be submitted to the court. The court may ask for oral argument on that, or it may decide it on the papers. But we're now at that stage of the proceedings where we're in a dispositive motion briefing stage. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you. We'll move right into old business. On A, old business is discussion of possible time change of regular meetings. I know, I was not at the workshop for October, but I know this was a discussion that was had at that point in time. And I wanted to bring it into this workshop just to make sure the public was involved before we made any kind of changes, before we went to any kind of a vote. So I will open that up to the discussion. I know there was some talk about just moving the time on the regular meetings, but I'll leave that open to.
Yes, I had brought that forward to suggest, and I just had picked 3 o'clock in the afternoon, especially now that we're live streaming. And I also do believe that all these meetings are agenda-driven. When people are excited about something, they show up. But, Friday nights is at 7, and sometimes we have to have our staff and employees there. I would like to see and propose that it's moved in the day. Whatever, if that's not a good idea and everybody wants it on a Monday or whatever, that's fine. I just think it should be during the day or even in the afternoon if possible.
And from my standpoint as well, I've heard from residents as well as business owners who would actually, it would be more convenient for those folks to attend and expand participation here in our meetings if it were at, say, a 3 o'clock time frame, particularly now that we have the live streaming. So, I support an earlier meeting. I like the Mondays and Fridays personally, but any day would be fine. I've heard a lot of feedback that it should be earlier.
I recall the last time we talked, I think we almost had a unanimous agreement that Friday, 3 p.m. sounded like a very reasonable change, and we were pretty much on the same page with that.
Agreed.
Yeah,
3 p.m.'s fine with me.
Yeah, and I've been on record of agreeing to that as well. I think it makes good sense, and I've certainly heard it from a number of people, like Commissioner Schlosser indicated.
And I did not share an opinion at that workshop, so just so you know, I don't like a lot of change. I'm fine with what we have, but I can understand that there may be the members of the business community that are interested in attending and coming earlier, and that's possible. I want to do it not for myself or us. I think it ought to be done for our constituency, and I have not heard a word from the constituency on this.
Just so the commissioners know, we did put this out through the communications department on Envision Rehoboth Beach, asking, are you in favor of changing the commissioner regular meeting time to 3 p.m.? And we did receive 10 responses with 9 respondents saying yes and 1 saying no.
Again, we don't know we don't know if they lived in town or they attend or they have property or anything. It was just more generic. Okay,
Correct.
so.
May I assume that we're not talking about the workshop, so everybody's fine with 9 o'clock on Mondays? And so the only change would be suggested to have the regular meetings, which is the third Friday of the month, to be at 3 o'clock rather than 7 o'clock. I don't see any problem with that. I just look back on when I was a commissioner before in 06 or 07. I think this is when this came up before, and the meetings were changed, because if you recall, we used to have meetings, I believe at 9 o'clock on the first Monday and the third Monday of the month. And a number of commissioners at that point in time, as well as residents at that point in time, felt shunned, if you will, that they didn't have the opportunity to come to meetings because they were from out of town. And so I think at that point in time, that was why it had been moved to a Friday night. So to kind of balance that, if you wanted to go to the workshop and you were here, that's fine on Monday morning, but on Friday night, people wanted to go to the meetings that were living out of town. at that point in time, my point of view was I had lived out of town for many years, and the last thing I had ever thought about was coming down on the weekend and going to a meeting at 7 o'clock on Friday night. And so I thought from my perspective at that point in time, that was kind of absurd, but if so many people that own property in town wanted to see something like that, that was something to choose. So I don't know that we saw any increase in people going to meetings or any decrease in people going to the meetings. But over time, I have heard as well that, especially in the summertime, when there are some controversial things going on, that people are working or they're traveling, or Friday night is a hard time to get here, and they're more in favor of something like a Monday morning, or maybe something later in the afternoon if they have the opportunity to take off part of the day in the afternoon. So from my perspective, I think I'm open to that, and if it's the consensus of the commissioners up here to move forward with that, we can take that to a vote at the next meeting. But I know we have someone in the public that would like to speak. Now, I'm assuming on this issue. Thank you.
I think this item ought to come up, at least be exposed on a regular meeting night. That it should not be discussed here. And the people that are not here not know what was discussed. I think just about all of you up there knew what you were running for and what time the meetings were when you were last sworn in. You're not going to know with television. You're not going to know with television who is or is not listening in and when, and it doesn't matter what they do in the privacy of their own home or businesses. But it's a mess. You folks are here all day today with the meetings you have, and sometimes on Fridays. It's a mess to take off and lose potentially the whole day not knowing what time this meeting is going to start. Excuse me, what time it's going to end, because there have been the days that it doesn't end until 1:30, and then you go into a 2 o'clock meeting. So you're talking about Friday night meetings from 3 o'clock, and I think Ms. McGinnis last time even proposed a 3-hour limit. Is that going to come up at the next meeting? Because you have problem enough getting things on the agenda that need to be discussed. And then there's items that are not discussed when you get one person ask for a stop sign and gets it, the people never hear a thing about it because that doesn't come up in the city manager's report. I think this is a mistake. I think it's running too fast. I think it ought to come up at a regular meeting. And I think it ought to go to referendum. And maybe that on the next election or something like that. Do you have a preference? But I think in this day and age, I don't know how many electronic social media formats you're out on. People don't have time to read all this stuff to find out what's happening because they're busy with their daily lives. And why are you changing the regimen? This is too much, too fast. And there are those of us, very few of us anymore, until today with video, that really know what's happening, because you can pretty much write down before you came in here this morning, unless somebody had a special interest, who was going to be sitting in this room. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross.
Any other comments? If not, we'll just go ahead and put that on the regular meeting, Ann, for, what is it, November 16th for a vote to change the meeting time on Fridays only, the regular meeting, from 7 p.m. to 3 p.m. And we will, as we've done in the past, notice it through the agenda. It was on this agenda. It was on the agenda for the October workshop as well. And obviously, there'll be a little bit further discussion at the regular meeting and then the vote itself. Okay, we'll move right on to new business. And new business, the first is a discussion and consideration of establishing a bamboo ordinance. And Dennis Jenny will get up and speak. And we do have a couple of people that have brought this issue to the public and had been speaking with Dennis on this, and it's Barbara and Howard Katz, who are property owners in South Rehoboth, and they've been working directly with Dennis, who has been working with the city solicitor on the possibility of an ordinance. I think there has been an ordinance, I think Dennis had mentioned to me, and I'm sure he'll mention it, that was done for the city of Dover. And if you look up on Google, there's a number of different municipalities that do have these type of ordinances. You know, they're a little bit different. So with that, I'll just introduce Dennis Jenny, and you can take it from there,
Good
please.
morning, thank you for having me here. So, I'm code enforcement officer for City of Rehoboth Beach. Yes. So, what I brought forward, this draft, completely just a draft for now. The reason that I started looking into it is because there is no enforcement of bamboo here in the town. I have no enforcement means. I get complaints, property owners, their neighbors' bamboo is growing into their property. And, you know, the state of Delaware, we fall under the doctrine of self-help. So if it's coming onto your property, you're constantly out there trying to keep it, you know, cut down and back. And I've seen some properties where the bamboo is right on the property line, and yet you go into the middle of the neighbor's backyard, and you got little shoots all over the place. Bamboo used to be labeled as evasive here in the state of Delaware, but that was dropped several years ago because the state could not keep up with the policy and enforcing it. So it's no longer considered evasive here in the state of Delaware. Bamboo, it can be very troublesome. When you get the running bamboo and it grows into the neighbor's property or even on your property, it's been known to damage foundations and wreak all kinds of havoc. So for me, drafting up an ordinance, I took a look at Smyrna, Dover, Wilmington, just kind of got ideas from what they're doing, and just felt that this is something that we need. It give me something I can enforce and give some of these property owners a little bit of relief. You know, obviously, we're not going to penalize somebody who's already has bamboo on their property and is keeping it contained. But it's when it gets out of control, it becomes a problem. So I came up with a draft. I've worked with the Katzes a little bit here. You know, way forward, if we're interested, they get a working group together, sit down, go over the draft, come up with other ideas if anybody else has other ideas. But for now, I think, would you mind listening to Katzes?
Yep. Howard, would you like to say something? Please stand up there. And your name and address, please, when you get up there. Thank you.
I'm Howard Katz, and this is my wife, Barbara. And we are the owners of 15.5 Stokely Street and have owned the property since 1989. We thank the commissioners for giving us this opportunity to talk about the impact of bamboo and how it has affected the use and enjoyment of our property. We have been living adjacent to this running bamboo for 29 years. The stand of bamboo in question runs approximately 60 foot on our western boundary and is 14 foot tall. Over the years, we approached the owners of number 17 on numerous occasions to possibly share in the cost of the removal of the bamboo, which they refused to do. All our efforts to stop its perpetual march into our yard have failed. For 29 years, we have had to pay twice a year to cut the bamboo to try and keep it at a reasonable height, which is 14 foot right now. Throughout the year, we tried to cut the rhizomes, which have now migrated over the entire yard. All the work has been very expensive, futile, and time-consuming. We're in the landscaping business in Bethesda, Maryland, and our livelihood revolves around the creation of beautiful gardens. We are horrified and embarrassed by our rear yard, which is barren, ugly, and we are held hostage by this invasive plant. We have had zero enjoyment of this rear yard. Just to coexist with this noxious plant has cost us thousands of dollars over the years, and which is neither fair nor equitable. The only way to get rid of the rhizomes, which are below the ground, is to use an excavator to rip them out. we are going to have to methodically comb through every square inch of the ground to remove these rhizomes. Why should we have to bear the full responsibility of this unwanted intrusion? In desperation, we reached out to the Rehoboth arborist initially, as we needed to first remove some weed trees before we were going to be enforced to plans to do some other major work. We also wanted to talk about the bamboo issue, but we would not be allowed to remove the weed trees without planting new trees, and we could not do this until we had removed the bamboo. So it soon became clear that the city of Rehoboth could not help us resolve this issue unless there was an ordinance in place. So we were stuck. We then wrote to Dennis Jenny, the Rehoboth Beach Code Enforcement Officer, and requested that if the city could help us consider a bamboo ordinance, which would assist us in the short term, but would prevent the planting of new bamboo, running bamboo, in the city limits in perpetuity. Many cities in Delaware and other states ban the planting of running bamboo. The city has been very supportive of our quest, and recently we were relieved to learn that the bamboo ordinance was under consideration. We are grateful that Rehoboth is now considering this seriously. There are multiple things that we would like to do to enhance our rear garden, but are prevented from doing until the bamboo issue is resolved. Remove weed trees, which we cannot do at this time because it triggers replanting new trees. Install a boundary fence, it's impossible right now. Construct a low rear deck and patio, impossible until the rhizomes are fully removed. Install beautiful new plantings to create a proper garden is totally impossible. We would sincerely appreciate Rehoboth enacting the strongest possible bamboo ordinance, which bans the new planting of running bamboo under any circumstance. Where existing bamboo affects a neighbor's property, it must be controlled in such a way as to eliminate its threat to the adjacent neighbors. Simply installing a barrier is insufficient, as the rhizomes are already embedded all over the neighbor's property. Strong enforcement incentives must be in place to ensure that the owner of the bamboo responds quickly and effectively. In conclusion, we thank you for your time and attention, and we hope that our frustrating situation is about to change. If possible, Barbara would now like to say a few words about the bamboo plant.
Good morning. Thank you very much for allowing us to talk a little bit about the situation. I'm a landscape designer and contractor, and my business is based in Bethesda, Maryland. And throughout my 30 years in the business, I do have to do tremendous battle with bamboo on a regular basis because, unfortunately, even the best efforts to contain it in a barrier so often fail. The actual specifications for creating the proper kind of barrier to contain bamboo are so onerous to do absolutely correctly. Most people, including myself as landscape contractors, are invariably unable to do it exactly as it should be, and these barriers fail over the course of 5, 10, 15 years. I'm just going to read a little bit from, I did some extra research online, and there's a person by the name of David Benfield, and he is a bamboo grower. So he loves bamboo. He's made it his life's work to grow something like 300 different species of bamboo. And he created this article to just talk a little bit about if you wanted bamboo, what you would need to do. So I'm just going to give you a couple tidbits from what he's written. He says, there's no shortage of information on the internet pertaining to bamboo management, but unfortunately, most of it is wrong. Misinformation about bamboo seems to be no less widespread among otherwise knowledgeable people, including landscapers, nursery workers, extension agents, and other horticultural professionals. The majority of these fine people are not intentionally trying to malign this giant grass. The source, I believe, comes from the fact that bamboo is such an unusual plant with unusual behavior that it defies much conventional wisdom in the area of best plant management practices. So, first, let's talk about what doesn't work when you want to manage bamboo. Tillers, pond liners, concrete, roofing metal, herbicides, and thin plastic barriers are all limited in how much they can keep bamboo in place. Tillers will break up the rhizomes, but won't kill them. And you are left with shorter, bushier bamboo because each little piece of rhizome is viable. Rhizomes and shoots will eventually puncture pond liners. Concrete always eventually cracks sooner or later, and the rhizomes find their way through that concrete when that happens. It's nearly impossible to seal the seams on roofing metal, and then it also eventually oxidizes. Herbicides work only in very large quantities, and none of us really want to be pouring glyphosate down the stems of the bamboo anymore anyway, and they're not as effective or fast as physical solutions. Even plastic marked as rhizome barrier, and it's all over the internet, by seemingly knowledgeable people is often inadequate in its depth or thickness to provide long-term protection against the inevitable spread of bamboo rhizomes. So I just mention this because I know that there are people who feel that there's a very specific purpose for bamboo, but creating the right barrier to contain the bamboo is very, very problematic. And that's why our sort of focus is that going forward, running bamboo should just not be allowed to be planted in new situations. And it's not a problem in certain situations where it's not affecting a neighbor or adjacent people. It's really to be looked at when it's having a huge impact on someone's property. Finally, just want to give you, this is just a very interesting information about the actual plant. Spring is the season when you see most of the above ground growth from bamboo, explosive growth. The rhizomes, and these are the pieces that run horizontally through the ground, they're between 12 to 18 inches in the ground. All of the rhizomes have buds that will form new vertical growth called shoots, and these are initiated between February and June, depending on the species and the latitude where it's grown. These shoots emerge tapered like an oversized asparagus and at full diameter, and these things are sharp. So you step on them or you fall on them and you are absolutely injured. These shoots emerge tapered, and they will reach their full height in less than 8 weeks and then spend a few months forming branches and leaves. And yes, even if the full height is a 65-foot bamboo. Bamboo has set the record as the fastest growing plant on Earth, topping out at 35 inches in a day and nearly 1.5 inches in an hour for certain species. Typically, however, you won't see more progress than just a few inches a day. So I just wanted to give some of that horticultural information about the bamboo plant, and I have more information, which I think I'll just give to Dennis, about different situations, people where just they're living next door to barriers that were reinforced concrete that were done supposedly appropriately, and the bamboo either leaps over the edge or in very sandy soils is very, very happy to go as deep as it needs to go beneath the barrier and come out the other side. And our property in particular, we have the hedge on one side and the bamboo is now everywhere, coming up every side of the house on the far eastern boundary. And we've got a spectacular holly tree there, and I know that the bamboo is all interwoven in the roots of the holly, and I just don't know if we're ever going to be able to conquer it. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you know, I've heard about bamboo, obviously, over the last 25 years or so from various neighborhoods around the city. You know, some have it, I think, over by Silver Lake. There's a decent amount on the one of the north fingers. And various different places around town. And some think it's a nice barrier to have, and they somehow control it, and others figure it's a nuisance. I mean, I think from the perspective of putting in an ordinance, I think it's the right thing to do. It's just having the right language. I mean, I'm not saying that someone has to just go and change their complete plans, but if it becomes a nuisance to someone, and I've seen this property, it is a nuisance, and for some reason, it doesn't seem to grow the west, it just grows east, or that's the way it seems. And, you know, I think in certain cases, some people like it because it is a barrier, and somehow they can work to control it. But I think, like many things in town, people own these properties and like to enjoy them, and I think it's something that we should consider because some people have these properties and they can't enjoy their properties because of the intrusiveness of something like this. So I'm open to any kind of thoughts on this, but I think personally that it's a good thing to take forward and to do a little bit more research and have an ordinance and work with the city solicitor as well as Mr. Jenny to put something like this together, because we do have this in other communities around the state, and I think it's something that we should consider.
I agree. I think it's a no-brainer, but I have a question. So this is about someone who's, if we have an ordinance, who's defined and planting something, just like if we have a list of invasive species they should not be planting, are they held to the same standards and penalties and fees? Or is this just for bamboo? Because there's things we want to encourage planting and things we do not. I'm assuming this is someone who would be sneaking it in and planting bamboo to have these penalties to happen because you have a tree planting with your building and tree removal process.
But you don't have a planting for
What's
shrubs or whatever. But this is more, I think, from the perspective of moving forward and saying no to planting bamboo, but also maybe moving forward, and Glenn can explain a little bit more from a legal perspective on how neighbors can work together and worth the city so that something that's invasive like this does not grow into somebody that doesn't want it in their yard.
I understand that, but why are we just doing bamboo? Why wouldn't we do all invasive species? I mean, what happens when you have a tree that you're allowed to have and the roots grow into your neighbor's yard, or the branches are in your neighbor's yard? I mean,
Well, I would think most of
wouldn't
that
we-
people have to bring to us as,
I'm just saying, instead of
Yeah, so-
piecemealing, why wouldn't we have
It's-
everything?
Excuse me, it seems separate to me, actually, because bamboo is, I mean, I know where you're coming from, and there needs to be, probably in the tree ordinance to address that, but this also addresses two different things. One is people pre-existing bamboo with the issues that the Katzes are dealing with, and that needs to be dealt with. And I'm not sure right at the moment that we've exactly got this right and needs to be talked about. But I did also have a question about that. We're looking at this as a criminal violation. That kind of surprised me.
That was my next
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, I remember back in the day, we tried to take a lot of the criminal and make them civil offenses. Why did we move forward with criminal on this one?
Yeah, Dennis and I actually, he sent it to me. He and I have not had a comprehensive conversation on the entire ordinance. So that's certainly something we can look at, whether we want it to be criminal or a civil type violation.
Yeah.
I think that's ancillary to the
I
larger
think
ordinance.
civil is more appropriate, personally.
The more important question, I think, about having a ordinance relating to bamboo is that bamboo seems to be something that's come up over and over and over, and it seems to be consistently a problem within the city. You already have, as commissioners, you already have the power to issue warrants to abate nuisances in the city. So if somebody came and had a different type of invasive plant and said, this is just messing my yard up, I can't deal with it, the neighbor, I mean, it's always best if neighbors work together, but they don't always work together. Neighbor won't cut it down, won't do this. You have the power then to issue a warrant, require somebody within a certain amount of days that are set out in the charter to abate it, and if they don't, then the city can go on the property and abate it. This ordinance takes that process and codifies the idea that you all are already declaring bamboo a nuisance. It's one that you've looked at, it's a nuisance, and you want the code enforcement officer to be able to deal with it when he finds it, rather than coming to you each time, asking you to issue a warrant, going through that process. The amount of procedure that's put into the ordinance already, the due process that's set up here, is already more extensive than what's required under the charter. So I think you can do it this way. It doesn't violate the charter in that somehow you're sidestepping it or not giving a person with a bamboo stand enough time or enough, those sorts of things that the charter would allow for. So I think you can do it. This one is specific to bamboo, but I think that's because bamboo is something that's just come up over and over and over, and it seems to be a consistent problem within the city.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Tony, you go ahead.
Just quickly, on line 35, in the section about exemptions, where it's addressing, it sounds like to me it's addressing that this does not apply to any landowner who, prior to the effective date, has the bamboo. But then in line 35, it does say, unless a code enforcement officer, upon complaint from any abutting or nearby property owner, et cetera, this is the piece that allows the code enforcement officer to actually take action if a property before this were to be enacted is encroaching upon a neighbor. Am I right about that?
I think that's right. And Dennis may want to comment, but if it didn't allow for that, the Katz's would be out of luck.
And that's what I was trying to
So-
figure out. How do we offer relief to someone who describes their situation as you have, with attempts to get something under control, and apparently that has not ever worked? So, Dennis?
Right, and that's why I included it in there. We have to give some of these folks some sort of relief to be able to control the bamboo on their property. Like I said, we don't want to penalize somebody who's keeping it in control, but if it's a nuisance right now, having this in the ordinance will give them some sort of relief. And just to address the criminal charges, I just kind of kept that in line with our exterior property maintenance violations, which are all criminal at the moment. So that's something else that we need to look at.
Look at for the future.
Right. And then I've been asked several times about the 14 days to be compliant. Everybody thinks that's too short of a time, and I know it is too short of a time, but what happens is someone, I give them a violation, tell me you have 14 days, well, then they're right on top of it. If we say 60 days, then they just drag their feet. But they call me, say, listen, it's gonna take me more than 14 days, well, I'm here to work with you. Whatever time it's gonna take, let's just see this through and get it done, so.
I have clarification for Dennis I'm sorry, Tony, were you done?
I'm done.
Okay. For Tony or Glenn, so there is something in the ordinance right now that can give these folks relief from the situation with
No.
the baby. Isn't there a nuisance or something like that
Nothing
where
like that,
they
no.
can come
Well, it's
forward?
under the charter. There is a provision in the charter, not within the
Right.
code, but in the charter. And the way it works, it's section 31 of the charter. Dennis would come to you and say, or anybody could come to you all and make a plea for you to issue a warrant. Basically,
Okay.
you're issuing a document to the person who's causing the nuisance. And under the charter, it only gives them 5 days. Once you issue that, it gives them 5 days to abate it. You authorize the city manager to take these steps, and 5 days to abate it. If they don't abate it within those 5 days, the city manager then can take action to have a contractor or have city employees go onto the property, abate the problem. Then she comes back to you all and says, I had to do it myself. Here's how much it costs. Then she'll issue another letter to them saying, pay for it. If they don't pay for it, then the next step is we place a lien against the property, and when the property sells, we get made whole.
Has
Thank
that
you.
happened? Have they
Yeah,
done
how
that?
many times, sorry, that was I have two follow-ups, so exactly what Commissioner Regan said. How many times has somebody come to you with a complaint about bamboo in their neighbors' yards? And how many times have we actually applied that provision of the charter that Glenn just mentioned?
I've had 5 complaints over the last 2 years. One, I would say, official complaint. The other 4 were like by telephone call or just being out in the street and somebody asked me about it or complaining about it. And I've never, under my code, I don't have enforcement. If it's the nuisance, I'm not sure if that's the police force that would address it, but I've never had to address the nuisance.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis deals typically in the property maintenance
Got it.
code and sections. The charter isn't something that he's typically flipping through.
Gotcha.
I'm just
Well,
a
why,
nerd.
I'm
That makes
confused,
sense.
But we have something here that they could use for relief.
You do.
Why weren't they directed to do that?
It's just not a discussion that Dennis and I had, so it, you know.
So who would do that? Would we advise the homeowner to go to the police to issue this warrant? City manager? What would
No,
be the
it'll
process?
It's you. It's a warrant under the mayor's hand, signed by the mayor, a warrant, and then she will send it to them. It doesn't have to be
Okay.
you are a quasi judicial body in some instances, and so this is.
So they would
your
come
own
to the city manager, should bring it to the commission? Okay.
that would
So,
really work.
so while this is being tweaked or looked at or discussed, they have relief, is what I'm hearing.
You can approach it that way if you'd like to. This ordinance certainly is more comprehensive, and, you know, we'll handle it once and for all, so that every time it comes up, Dennis doesn't have to come back and ask you all to issue a warrant.
Oh, yeah, I see the need for it. I see the need for it, but there should be no reason why they can't move forward to take care of this issue now instead of waiting for us to pass
Exactly.
an ordinance either next regular meeting or the one after that, or however long it takes us, so.
I should be clear, even in the warrant, you all have to pass an ordinance issuing the warrant. So it's going to be an ordinance one way or the other.
Okay,
And I think this is comprehensive, and it hits all the things that we've heard about, and it covers us as we move forward.
So, I'm
it's
sorry,
on-
I wasn't done with my comment too, and that is, it seems to me that we're a city that we issue a regulation for every 1 or 2 one-offs on everything, even when we have an ordinance that allows us to address a specific issue. So one official complaint in 2 years on this issue, and we're gonna put in place a whole new ordinance on one specific invasive species that now is added to, this is one code enforcer that we have, and we're gonna add something else to his plate to have to enforce. There's been one official complaint in 2 years, and we're gonna write a whole ordinance, require enforcement, and focus on one specific invasive species. It seems to me that, you know, our response to just immediately write a big, comprehensive, complex ordinance to solve a problem where there may or may not be, I'd like to hear more from a broader sense of the public on this, as if it's a problem, rather than just continuing to create new regulation that puts a burden on our city staff and our residents. So I am adverse to any kind of ordinance unless I hear from a broader audience that this specific thing is as big as an issue that requires an entire ordinance.
Well, I've been here 20 years, been commissioner for, I guess, almost 12 years. But during those 20 years, I've heard a lot of questioning about bamboo. Some of the people that I know that have it love it because it's a screen. However, their neighbors also love it because they like this reciprocal screening that they get. But most of what I've heard over the years is coming from complainants. What have a lot of these complainants done over the years? This is before you were on board. Is they go to the state. You know, Title III, the state has a nuisance plant ordinance that has a nuisance plant committee, and it has a nuisance plant list. I can't find such thing as a nuisance plant list, okay? What I did find is an invasive plant list, Planning for a Livable Delaware, that includes bamboo. And by the way, I think the Katz has mentioned running bamboo, there's cluster bamboo, there's different types of bamboo. Certainly, we need to specify if we go forward with this, what kind of bamboo, because Nandina bamboo obviously is a flowering bush, if you will. And I would think that that's not what we're talking about there. But back to the state law there, the nuisance plant list has penalties as an administrative penalty only, not less than $50 and no more than $1,000 per violation. No person who cultivates this nuisance plant shall allow it to spread to neighboring properties. State law also has, and what I found also interesting in Planting for a Livable Delaware, it does mention that acceptable barriers for bamboo are not just the high density plastic, but also concrete and metal. So it was enlightening to hear that perhaps those fail over time. Also within the state law is it mentions they have a code specific to noxious weeds, which really only has about 4 noxious weeds in there, so it does not have anything to do with bamboo. But what I thought was interesting was the penalty, and indeed it's a civil penalty, which I would approve of. I could not see supporting a criminal penalty for this kind of thing.
Can I ask you a quick question, Stan? Could our code, or maybe this is Glenn, could our code enforcement team actually use the state law to, or do we have to put a specific municipal or city ordinance in place? I mean, to actually address this issue? I mean, could we actually just apply the state
Yeah.
code as opposed to a new ordinance?
Well, I guess there's a couple answers to that. One is.
And I'm not done, I want to
Yeah,
come back.
sorry, I thought maybe you knew that.
so-
No, yeah.
I think that there could be some reliance upon the state code. Typically, it's somebody like DENRIC or a state agency that would then come in to abate it. And getting a state agency to do something like that within a municipal corporation is typically not an efficient route, right? Or zero.
So he couldn't use that, our code enforcement.
Right, right. I would rather
person
he rely
couldn't.
upon our charter
Thank you.
provision that
Thank you.
allows for it.
And I'm in agreement. All these complainants that went to the state before, they got zero help because for many reasons. One is that the state doesn't have the manpower to come and investigate everything. But primarily, in my opinion, it's because of the lack of specificity in the code. So therefore, I would not want to reference the code and try to use it. I think that having a specific code that targets this is the way to go. I like some of the flexibility in it. I mean, my mind's not made up on everything, but I know the Katz's were indicated a total ban on bamboo. But if you recall, if you read the proposal, it deals with existing bamboo and that it can't become a problem. It needs to be remediated. That also new. If you want to have new, you can, but you've got to fill these certain parameters and conditions, and that's by containing the rhizomes or roots within a container there. So it may not satisfy you 100%, but it's addressing that, and I think it's a great start. My first question was, is there a legal review of this? And I understand there's not, because there's a lot of question marks in here. Over the years, I just wanted to share you, some of these complaints have come from Maryland Avenue, abutting Olive Avenue. There's a big grove of bamboo there. It's very destructive, and not just the roots, but beating against the houses and scratching and everything. Park Avenue has a large grove, if you will, whatever a cluster of bamboo is called, that actually looks like it's largely on city property in Central Park. So we need to be good stewards of our own parks and start there, I think. And then Philadelphia, backing up to Munson, I know a big place there that needs it. So in terms of some specifics of the code, whoever's going to handle this, I can certainly email some things, but that they can't plant closer than 10 feet to the property line. I don't know if if 3 feet is acceptable. You know, if they have that barrier and they maintain it. And I understand the biggest thing with these barriers is that you extend them above the ground, but the bamboo is smarter than us and it goes over. And so that's why it extends above the ground for visibility, so that we can go check it and cut it with some frequency. So that 10 foot. The 14 days, I'm not sure I buy that explanation, but I understand it. And maybe without correcting it, they just need to contact you in 14 days. I don't know the answer to that. There's some references in here that I'll email you that I want to know what the references are. I think they're referencing numbers in a property maintenance code, and I can't find them. There's actually a redundancy here on lines, on the city removing is actually in 2 places. So I'll send you a note on that. There's an appeal process where the city manager is, I call it the boss of the building and licensing, acting on the appeal, and I want to question whether that's the proper appeal process versus the commissioners. And the cost, and then back, finish with, I got some small ones I'll send you, but that largely, I do think it's a good ordinance, as long as we review it, give it some flexibility. And I think there is a problem with it, again, because in part, the state has a law about it, but they're impotent. They don't do anything. And,
I just
and
wanted to
think it's
clarify
best to be
too.
in our hands.
When I say one official complaint, the other folks are just anonymous. And 90% of the time I get complaints, they're anonymous. People just want to remain anonymous, so just want to point that out. All right.
And
Mayor,
we,
just a couple of
sure,
comments.
and we can have Mr. Jenny work with the solicitor to put together something. And Commissioner Mills, if you have those comments, please pass them on to both of them. Go ahead, Dick.
Yeah,
I'm
let me
sorry.
just weigh in briefly on this. I tend to support this ordinance for the reasons that have been discussed here already. I want to thank the Katzes and thank Bob for weighing in and for your comments, because I think your comments certainly help us see the reality of what the situation is from your perspective and from your example as well. I like the flexibility in here. I think there needs to be the exemptions. I think we need to be very specific about those. We need to be very specific about the type of bamboo that's referenced, like you already said, that there are several species, some of which are not harmful to our environment or not a nuisance. Strongly feel that it needs to be a civil penalty. I think in several areas here and where we have a couple of other commissions looking at civil versus criminal, we need to be moving away from criminal and to civil penalties. I do have a question, because all of the examples that have come up, it sounds like, thus far are about existing running bamboo that's problematic. And maybe with our arborist here, we might be able to get some insight. Are people planting running bamboo? Are you running into examples that over the last couple of years that people are still planting this?
So when Dennis is talking about like number of complaints and stuff, I can kind of back him up on that. There are certainly other plants I hear more complaints about. We're talking ivy weekly type of thing. And in the 3 years I've been here, I've had about 2 people ask me where they can buy bamboo. So, which is disconcerting. So then I launch into my educational, here's why you don't want bamboo, even in container, even with a barrier, because all it takes is one piece, cut it down and somebody tries to haul it away, the company you hire, and one piece ends up laying in the neighbor's yard and it'll grow from there. So there really, when they're talking about barriers, there really is nothing that will 100% work, right? But people still do want to plant it for that screen. Mm-hmm. And it's not really available. I've not seen it in any of our nurseries here. I know you can order it online, and I know it's not cheap. So, and that's where Maryland, they actually have it banned in the nurseries as well as several other invasive species. So I'd say it is an issue that people will still want to plant it. Will they know that the city has a bamboo ordinance? I don't know.
I'm glad you said that, Liz, because that's what was going through my head. If I were buying a property right now and it was a vacant lot, how would I know, if we move forward with this, how would I know not to even consider in my landscape plan bamboo?
Yeah, because the city doesn't really, I get people calling me all the time asking, like, do I need a permit to prune? Do I need a permit to
Right.
plant? And I'm like, no, we don't deal with that, any of that. So it's going to come back to education and what type of push we want to make. And I'm a firm believer in anything, whether it's a tree ordinance, an invasive species ordinance, that should always be our first step. And that the enforcement and fines and penalties should be a piece of the puzzle, but it's not ever the whole solution, right? So.
You know, one thing we could do is, for all new homeowners, issue a welcome packet that welcomes them, and oh, that's right, the communications committee's already done that, and I don't know what happened to it, but we had that, and we should probably resume doing such a thing.
Well, I think, as people buy property, they'll be going to the building and licensing for something or other. And I'm sure if we can put an ordinance together, that'll be out front, much like a tree ordinance will be out front. And here's certain things that you have to do on your property. So that's why, I think all these comments have been very good, but I
And
think.
hopefully,
I think
there are
this-
suggestions of what else could be planted besides. And I can tell you from personal experience, I had bamboo. And I had a barrier, and it did. It jumped right over it. It was in my neighbor's yard. I said, oh my God, I'm getting rid of this. And I planted upright European hornbeams, which is a beautiful screen and worked really well.
Yeah, so there are a lot of other options, and Commissioner Mills referred to the Plants for a Livable Delaware, and they're a great resource because they list each invasive, and then they offer alternatives to that, so.
So we have an expert here, a tree expert, right? And
Invasive species, I
and
did that.
invasive species. I've learned so much about Liz recently, way more than just trees. So, and this is our expert in the city. And I think I think what I just heard you say is that education maybe is something you approach, you look at first before you jump right into ordinance and fining people and this and that. And the second thing that you as our expert just said, I'm just, again, you tell me if I'm wrong.
But you're right
So far I'm okay. And the second thing is that you hear complaints about other invasive species more than you hear complaints about bamboo. Is that accurate?
Yes, and
Okay.
anybody can tell you who's lived next to bamboo, it is pervasive and terrible. And from both a personal and professional, if I was in the market for a house or a lot and I saw bamboo next to me, it'd be off the list. I wouldn't even consider it because I know what it can do. But it would be the same if it was vinca or English ivy or mulberries. I mean, I have a slew because exclusively for 3 years, both for the state of Delaware and city of New York, all I did every day was control invasive species. So I know which ones we can control and which ones, like bamboo, that it's a huge, huge problem.
So with those two pieces of information from our expert that we depend on in all respect here in our city, I just wonder if this shouldn't be looked at as if everybody's intent on putting some more regulations in place, then should this be looked at as a broader ordinance about invasive species overall and putting out a process as opposed to just focused on bamboo specifically? What happens when I come forward as one official complainant in 2 years and say, I'm sick of the azaleas next door to me or the ivy growing from my neighbor or XYZ, invasive species? Then we're putting in a new ordinance for everything. One or two, no offense, one or two people come to the commission as opposed to the other 3,700 people who haven't weighed in or haven't come forward with a formal complaint. So if everybody feels and has heard over the years that invasive species is an issue, maybe it should be broader than just bamboo, or we try education before putting in another regulation, is the two things that I would just ask folks to consider, because it just seems one ordinance after another. There's going to be other invasive species that people don't like, and I don't want to be doing an ordinance for every invasive species personally.
And you could. We could end up back here in a half a year about another species, and I think Commissioner McGinnis addressed that. If we're going to do it, you have to have a list, and the problem comes back to with bamboo, there is the Delaware Invasive Species Council that has a list of invasive species. Bamboo's not on it for whatever reason. I can't figure out why.
Yeah.
There's plants that are less bad on there. So, I mean, but yeah, if you're going to do, if we're intent on doing an ordinance, I think it needs to be more comprehensive, or we could find ourselves back here a month from now, 5 years from now, the same thing.
So
Another
Mayor-
thought that occurs to me on this, however, is that this is not an overly dramatic approach to a nuisance situation, because I think it was Barbara said that many other communities have such a ban, that this is not unusual. It's not just a knee-jerk reaction to something. It's in line with a fairly commonsensical approach to this nuisance.
I think there's 2 in the state of Delaware. I mean, I haven't researched this intently, so to speak, but I think Smyrna and Dover. Dennis would probably know better. Is that it in Wilmington? And I'd be curious to know how they do enforcing it, because say you get a complaint about bamboo and we've banned specifically this type of bamboo, and we go out and there's pretty easily 100 species of bamboo that's available to purchase. So what, are we going to be taking samples and sending it off to a lab to get us a diagnostic on which species is which? Because they swear that they planted this bamboo and it looks like this to me. I mean, that could happen.
So we should definitely make time to do some study and some research as we approach this.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Okay, well, it seems like there's a consensus up here to move forward with putting this ordinance together. I would suggest, Commissioner Schlosser, you can work with our city arborist to put together maybe a list of invasive things that we may want to take and use this ordinance to go forward. But I think from the complaints that we have seen over the years, the cats are not unusual in having the problem for over 20 years. I've heard that from other people that have had to work on it every year. I think this is something that is pretty simple. We can have Mr. Jenny work with the city solicitor, and Mr. Mills, if you want to pass along your thoughts, and if any of the commissioners have any thoughts on specifics within the ordinance. But I think this is probably something that we should look to put in place at some time in the future, once we work through the language and the penalties and whatnot.
I do just want to add that including other species possible, or another arm of wherever it goes in the tree ordinance with process, because there's some uninvasive species that are still going into people's yards. So in general.
Understandably so, but this is something that was brought to us, and I think we should address it, and we have today. But I think if you would like to get together with Commissioner Schlosser on that, to work with Liz on that, that's fine, to put together something. And maybe there's a list of invasive species that we could add to an ordinance. But I think this is something that's pretty simple, and it has been something that goes on not only in Delaware, but other places around the country.
Mayor, one last thought, if I might, please. And this isn't totally off the topic, although just a little off the topic. You know, we do have in the city a committee, a mayor's advisory committee on trees, chaired by Commissioner Sharp. I also have the opportunity to serve on that committee. And while we've been looking at trees, several of us on the committee have had some side conversations about also the importance of other species of plants in addition to trees that are important in the beautification and other aspects of our city. And so as time goes on, we may want to look at the mission of that committee and expand it beyond trees to also gardens, particularly public gardens, but also as ways to provide educational awareness to folks that are planting things in addition to trees as to what are good and what are not so good for our environment. So just a thought, an idea that several of us have had. Thank you.
So, Mayor, I know in the interest of time, we'll move on, but while we continue to ponder this, because I'm not certain exactly how I feel about it at this moment, but what is the remedy for the Katz family at this moment?
Well, there's a couple options. One is if you think you're gonna if you think you're gonna move forward and get this ordinance on the books, that will eventually address their problem that they've been dealing with for sounds like 20 years now. That's one option. The other option is you could, go with the charter provision that allows for you to issue a warrant particular to this property for the abatement of this particular stand of bamboo. aside from the ordinance.
So would we have to put in an ordinance to do that?
Yes, no, it can be by ordinance or resolution. It's relatively, interestingly enough, Henlopen Acres, we pursued it once, and before they actually adopted the ordinance, the property owners got together and worked it out and got fixed. So I've drafted them before. It's really a one-page ordinance referencing the charter provision and laying out the reasons that this particular stand should be abated. And you might want to know more. I mean, we've had a general discussion about bamboo. You might want to know more about that particular property and why it should or should not be declared a nuisance stand of bamboo.
So we could do that pretty quickly?
You could.
While we're working on,
I could have that ready for your regular meeting if you wanted.
Can you tell me again what the address is of this property?
Was it 17 and a half Stokely?
15 and a half Stokely.
Can I interject one more time, just because, sorry for butting in. The end of last week, the house next to them with the bamboo is actually getting demolished. And you guys may or may not be aware, I think you are, they are going to excavate all of the bamboo. I don't know if they've worked out anything with you about your property, but that is going to be a solution. Whether or not it grows back, I can't say. I know they've had luck so far. I think Commissioner Mills referred to the bamboo in the edge of the park. Used to be the Winter Inn was covered in bamboo. When they demolished it and excavated, the only bamboo that was left was what had spread. So they had luck there. So I would hope, with fingers crossed, that you guys would have luck. But so there is a solution in place, and the demo contractor confirmed that the end of last week for that particular property.
You know when?
Yeah, I'm sure it can be provided to you if you come over to the building licensing after this.
So when is this going to happen? The demo, is it soon?
Yeah, definitely within, I'm trying to think, because we met with him. I mean, within the next few weeks, probably they'll be demolishing the house. I'm not off the top of my head, I'm not sure. But when I go to the property for demo, it usually occurs within a month. I just can't remember the exact time frame. But I figured it was relevant for our discussion now.
That's an incredibly relevant,
Well,
in my opinion.
I'm going to say, unless something, I mean, you never know. Something could change. The demo contractor could quit and the person could change their mind. Could have happened this weekend. But as of last week, that was what was in the works.
Glad you butted in.
All right. So with that in mind, maybe we just hold up on the special warrant situation, but we ask Dennis to work with Glenn on working on something as a possibility for an ordinance as we move forward.
Works. That works.
That works. And then we'll keep an eye on the property as far as specifically if the,
Right, if the demo doesn't do what we hope it's going to do, then you have this process and you can go through the charter process, or the ordinance might be far enough along at that point.
Could I just say,
yeah.
one issue is the
At
stand.
the microphone, Mr. Cat.
The one issue is the stand, and if it is demolished, we'll be thrilled if all that bamboo is taken out. But our entire property is covered with the rhizomes, and that's what the ordinance talks about as well, and that's very interesting. So if the owner, or the new owner, takes care of the stand and takes care of that other situation, which is the rest of our property, we'd be very satisfied with that resolution.
So is it practical for the city to pull the two neighbors together and kind of work this through, or something along those lines?
When we approached the city for help originally, we were told that there was no other option for us but an ordinance. We were not told about any other opportunities that we had to get this resolved. And
By whom, excuse me? By whom? Who told you that there was none other? Because it sounds like there is.
well, when we started with the removal of our weed trees, we spoke to Liz, and she said we would have to plant new trees if we took out trees. So I said, that's fine, but we can't plant new trees because we have a bamboo issue. Because we can't plant anything right now until we've got all the rhizomes out of the rear yard. And so we had no option, because we asked them, could they help us go to the owners and get it resolved, get them to just take it out and do whatever they needed to do to help us get rid of the bamboo. And they said, no, there was no other way for us except to have an ordinance enacted.
So is the city willing to do something that? Is that appropriate to sit down now, or is that not?
So the answer there
Just to be a
is-
facilitator.
Is you have a legislative process in place and possibly an ordinance could be adopted that's the legislative means. I generally, as your counsel, advise against not getting involved when it's truly a neighbor-to-neighbor issue. I mean, if it's a city issue, whereas if you declare bamboo a nuisance, then it becomes a city issue. But at this point, before it's a city issue, while I think building and licensing will try to help that along from time to time, generally I don't make it, I ask you all not to make it a policy to get involved in every neighbor's dispute.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, so we'll just move forward that way, and Dennis, you can work with Glenn on that. All right, thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to move up D to right now to get this over pretty quickly. Dick, you had asked that your presentation goes pretty quickly.
See?
Excuse me, C.
Okay.
C.
Yeah, and could I invite Commissioner Schlosser and citizen and good friend of the city of Rehoboth Beach, Faye Jacobs, to come over, and we'll share this microphone because the three of us have been instrumental in pulling together what we think is a terribly exciting resolution for the commissioners and the city to consider in the coming days. And in addition to what's in your packet, you're receiving a copy of a letter that was written by Faye Jacobs to me just a couple of weeks after I was elected. The elections, as you remember, on August 11th. And Faye Jacobs, good friend of the city, well-known, instrumental with Main Street and a number of good things, came to me and had a wonderful and positive idea. And I said, put it in writing and we'll talk about it and we will go from there. So I would like, as part of the official record, the September 5th, 2018 letter from Faye Jacobs to myself. And that's what triggered all of this and has us here this morning. So we're going to share for a few minutes and then we'll open it up to some discussion. And so, Faye, thank you for being with us and thank you for getting us together on this wonderfully positive concept.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back here. It's been 9 years since I've been before the commission. And I can't say I'm glad to be home because this is all new and beautiful. I'll read the letter that I wrote. Dear Commissioner Byrne, as I walked between Baltimore Avenue and the Convention Center this past Labor Day weekend, helping set up for Sundance 2018, I could only think of the late Steve Elkins. Each year, from Wednesday before Sundance until Tuesday after Labor Day, Camp Rehoboth Executive Director Elkins made numerous trips by foot between Camp Rehoboth Community Center and the Convention Center. He was always carrying a heavy briefcase, often protecting donated auction jewelry, and reams of paper or decorative items or donations. Steve would walk up Baltimore Avenue to 2nd Street, the crooked sidewalk, cross the street, then wind through the convoluted Breakers parking area. He'd walk past a number of exterior hotel rooms, always greeting the housekeeping staff, and finally he would appear at the rear of the convention center to enter through a side door. This trek became a familiar, frequent path for him, and all of us who saw him waved and asked how everything was going with Sundance. Now that he's gone, a sidewalk path at last has been installed between Baltimore Avenue at 2nd Street and the Convention Center. He would have loved it. And since it's a path and not a road and cannot be called an extension of Baltimore Avenue, I would hope the city of Rehoboth would consider naming this walkway Elkins Way. It would honor both a tradition and a man who gave so much and made such a difference in this town. I hope you'll consider this request worthy, perhaps work with other commissioners, and see if we can make Elkins Way a reality. Please let me know if you need more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye. And so I was immediately challenged with this wonderful, wonderful idea and went to Commissioner Schlosser and said, let's work on this as a team and move it ahead. I had the opportunity very early on to meet with Murray Archibald, interim executive director of Camp Rehoboth, because I thought if this is going to go forward, he needs to give his stamp of approval, and he did immediately. He said, go for it, Steve would love it. I then proceeded to meet with Chris Beagle, chair of the board of directors of Camp Rehoboth, and Steve, speaking for the entire board, said, go for it. We're entirely supportive. So Commissioner Schlosser and I have met with the solicitor, with the mayor, the city manager to get their support, their approval, and to get this into resolution form. And so with that, Lisa, I'll turn it over to you to make a few comments, please.
Thank you. So just really quick from my perspective, Dick and Faye brought this to me since I know how to put things in the format that Stan proposed. So, and also I'm very supportive of this initiative. So, so what we're proposing here today, and it's in everybody's packet as well as attached to the agenda for today's meeting, along with 2 pictures of where this would be and what it generally would constitute. So you have 2 things in your packet. One is a tribute statement that was primarily written by Faye. And by the way, 9 years is too long for you not to be in front of this commission. You have such great ideas. So, and input. But basically what we're proposing is a resolution of the mayor and city commissioners of the city of Rehoboth Beach to name a sidewalk. It's located in Sussex County. Specific tax parcel is listed there, but it's at 229 Rehoboth Avenue, and it would extend from 2nd Street at the end of Baltimore Avenue along that sidewalk to where it ends at the convention center. And there's 2 pictures. You have the complete resolution. And Glenn, is there a need to read the entire resolution? So there's the resolution there, but I think what's equally as important in your packet, you have the aerial view of where the sidewalk is, and then you have a little bit more of a street view of exactly what we're talking about here. So that's in your packet, and we're hoping today I don't think we can vote today. I think we can open this up to discussion, but then put on the agenda to vote this in, and hopefully ask the city to have this in place by the early spring, around the 1-year anniversary of Steve's passing, so that we can appropriately have Faye and Camp Rehoboth and others dedicate this in his memory. Thank you.
I'd like to can I just add that if you're going to do signage or a plaque, that Murray is involved, since he's artistic and it's not some just pole with a sign that somebody made on there, that
If I could answer, we've already been in touch with Signorama, who has given me 2 examples of what the signs would look like. And of course, anybody from the city that would like to work on it, it would be whatever the city would like, really, as far as a plaque on the ground on a rock, or embedded in the ground, explain it, and just the street signs that say Elkins Way, they would be a different look than the city streets. But of course, everyone would be able to be involved in what the city, would like it to look like.
Yeah,
just something more artistic and creative than
and
the
indeed,
standard.
we'll continue to involve Murray very closely in this. He's incredibly supportive, and first day I brought this up, we sat in his office as an aside and both got tears in our eyes and hugged each other, and then went on with our discussion. And so he's incredibly supportive. Let me just build on this. We're looking at several options for signage. Our plan with this resolution is to work very closely with the city so that it conforms with what the city would like, but we would like to be creative. We would like to think so that it's not just a traditional street sign, but something perhaps a little unique to the short little distance because of the gardens that the city has put in alongside the sidewalk. We've talked about perhaps everything from some kind of a sign on a pole to possibly a bronze plaque that's embedded in the concrete on either end of the sidewalk. Essentially, the signage, whatever form it takes, will say Elkins Way to the convention center on Second Avenue end, and on the Convention Center end, it will say Elkins Way to Baltimore Avenue, and then possibly something in the garden that would say something very briefly about Steve Elkins. So we're looking at those possibilities. You know, we want it to fit with what the city has in mind. But let me add, the intent of this is that all of the costs, other than the labor costs for installation of putting a sign in the ground or something, will be covered by private dollars that are raised. We're not asking the city to pay for this. We will raise the money. Everyone who has had their hands on this has agreed that that would be the best way to go to honor Mr. Steve Elkins. And again, everyone involved with camp is 100% in on this. And again, I want to thank Faye Jacobs, a good friend of the city of Rehoboth Beach, for triggering this and getting us to think seriously about this and to work on this. I just think it's a fantastically positive thing for our city, not only now to honor this wonderful, wonderful human being who passed away early and very unexpectedly last March 15th, 2018. But also because his legacy will live on, and it lives on not only in our city and these coastal communities, but across the state of Delaware, across this country, and believe it or not, he has had an impact internationally. And I think that this is just an incredible positive opportunity for us. And so with that, you know, we'll open it up to discussion.
If you're
Our
looking,
hope is that there'll be a vote on November 16th.
if you're looking for support today, you've got mine from hello. I mean, I don't see any downside to this. I see it as a tribute that how could we, well, I can only speak for myself. How could I pass this up to be supportive and hope others feel the same way?
For the city to recognize Steve this way is really wonderful, and I think it says a lot about our city government and how important this is to us. So I'm really happy.
And someone who was here before Steve and Murray and before Camp Rehoboth, and because of Camp Rehoboth in the inception, and as a Camp Rehoboth board member, of course, I'm supportive. I don't even know if this is I'm just throwing this out there, if this is a opportunity or even possible, but maybe the brick pavers could have, you know, rainbow colors and coated. I don't know. There's just a lot, you know, like the yellow brick road, but have a rainbow brick road. There's just neat things out there. I hope they're as creative as possible.
Anything?
Oh, ready to vote?
All for it. Great, thank you very
Thank you,
much.
guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faye.
Awesome.
Yes. Please introduce yourself.
Walter Birmingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue. When Steve passed away, I talked with Stan and conveyed my thoughts also because Steve was a very good person. He did a lot for the community and did a whole lot for Delaware. But I've seen situations, Delaware State Fire School became Lewis B. Amabelli Fire Service Training Center. State has honored many legislatures by changing names of buildings, et cetera. And that's not the point here. But 4 meetings ago, nobody was talking about 3 o'clock meetings. And now you've got it theoretically on the agenda at the next regular meeting. Things happen very fast. And also, Ms. Kaufman stood up here and gave a report from the parking committee. And now you're avidly talking about a parking garage. Maybe not today at this meeting, whatever, but it's very much a subject. Everybody's jumping right on it because we need it yesterday. So I think maybe a slow up might be considered. I don't think it would happen. But to jump right in and do this would be short-sighted because Steve would want to be done right. And if you go out here and start putting together a plan and getting a consultant like you do regularly anymore, you could have on the books for a parking garage to be sitting there 2 years from now. And then the discussion just came in respectfully about markers at both ends of the sidewalk, which I thought was a very neat idea. But then most of you do not know that we succeeded in working on the water tower recently and breaking up the sidewalk and that's where the access part of the side of the water tower to work on. So you should not be putting a lot of things above ground or plaques on the ground without extensive thinking about the work on the water tank and what's going to go there. If you're planting a garden, the garden's going to get driven on. So a couple people ought to sit back and coordinate and not just have the city go out there and have somebody do something that's going to get wiped out. It's not fair to Stan's or Sam, Steve's legacy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Walter.
And thank you guys for putting this together. I think it's great. And I don't think it's too quick. And, you know, too many times over the past 25 or 30 years, we put things on hold and we're having to pay for it now. We're going to move on things as they need to be moved on because there are very important things that have to be done in this city. With that, I'll move to B. Jody?
Thanks, Faye.
People from T2.
Mayor and Commissioners, I'd like to introduce the folks from T2 that have been patiently awaiting this time for their presentation. Mr. Todd Dorsey is the Vice President of T2. T2 Systems have been working with the city for over 10 years as in the enforcement side of what we do with our parking division. And this presentation generally comes from some feedback from the commissioners and the public in providing additional, I'll say, efficiencies within the parking systems. And one of the, well, this will cover one of the software issues that we're contemplating for additional permitting online, which I know was a key issue that folks wanted to see. And just briefly, we'll touch on the fact that we're looking at a new model for multi-space pay stations in areas of the city where we've dropped the lease with another company and where we need additional meters. So turn it over to Todd, and he can introduce his team. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you
for
very much for
patience.
allowing us to be here today. My name is Todd Dorsey. I'm the Vice President of Sales for T2 Systems. With me today is Franklin McPherson, who's Territory Manager that focuses on primarily our software platform. Jody Backus is a Regional Sales Manager that focuses on our pay station multimeter business. So we've got some high-level things we want to talk about today about both of those areas. Happy to field any questions that you have. Again, thank you for the time today. Thank you for your business and partnership over the past 10-plus years, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks very much. I'm going to start off the presentation a little bit. See if this works here. Oops. Push the right arrow, it works. So today, just wanted to talk a little bit high level about some of the goals and challenges as we understand that are sort of happening at the city. We're looking at a little bit about your current solutions and how that impacts your sort of the operation and the constituents' user experience when they come into town and pay for parking and so forth. We're going to look a little bit around some of the areas that we've been talking to the parking folks about, which is online permit sales, whether that has to do with residential parkers or guest parkers or other areas that they traditionally sell permits to. We'll also introduce a little bit of information about our pay stations, as well as LPR enforcement. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the acronym LPR, it stands for License Plate Recognition. So it's literally the capture of the license plate image and translating that into a digital format and comparing it to a list. So I'll get into the details there a little bit more. We'll spend maybe just a couple minutes in terms of why T2 Systems, why we're here talking to you, why we're in front of you, then certainly open up to questions and answers. As we go through the presentation, we'll try to keep it high level. We'll try to keep it flowing. If there's any questions that you have, certainly throw it out there, and we'll cover it as we can. So just moving on. In terms of T2 Systems, we've been in the business, parking business that is, for over 20 years. We do technology for the parking industry, and So we're a solution provider. We're not just bringing to bear a product or a service specifically or by itself. We bring a multitude of products and services together to form a solution. So our goal is simply to make parking easier for our customers. So here's a picture of Rehoboth Beach. I'm not sure how far back this goes in terms of the time period, but it does show a busy sort of high traffic, lots of full capacity parking. And I think it's safe to say that your demand for parking, that is increasing. Your supply, however, is not. Even if we could add more spaces to this street, I don't think that would be possible. So that's one of the challenges that you face today. There are other areas of the city where perhaps demand isn't as, it's not like this. There could be some capacity. However, people aren't parking there, they want to park here, and that's one of your challenges. One of the other challenges we talked with the parking organization about has to do with the physical permits that are issued and distributed to people of either residents or guests in the community. Physical permits have to be ordered. They cost money to purchase. They have to be distributed. Traditionally, the way it works today in Rehoboth, people have to come in and pick it up, or you have to mail it. So there's a distribution aspect to that. There is possibility of it being forged. There's other challenges having to do with that. It's very time intensive. There's just a lot of work that goes into that. So one of the things we'll talk a little bit about today is the use of a parking plate, the license plate, as a permit. From an enforcement perspective, permits are somewhat difficult to enforce. You have to, if you're in a vehicle, you're an enforcement officer, you have to get out of the vehicle, look at the permit, make sure that it's accurate, make sure that it's not been forged, that the dates are correct, what have you. So from an enforcement perspective, it's not that efficient. Here are some of the ways that your guests and parkers are able to buy parking, transient parking that is. They're able to go onto the, my little pointer here, I don't know if you can see that, but the phone at the top, that's your Park Mobile solution. That's how people will buy parking online through their mobile app. It's called Park Mobile. The other way is to pay for parking through the pay stations down below or from a parking meter. The challenge with the current sort of spectrum of solutions that you have is that they don't really talk to one another. So they really represent a silo of information that you have to go into each particular back-end solution to either get your financial reports or try to pull information from each one and bring them into a centralized report to have any really useful information. So that's kind of one of the challenges that you have today. When we add to that your in-house parking management solution, as well as the citation solution that we provide, you've got sort of, at least 5, if not more, solutions that are quite independent from one another. And it doesn't allow you to pull that information together and form, some valid trends or really an idea of what to measure or where to take the parking operation. So that's one of the things that we'll talk a little bit today in terms of a different type of parking model. It's not a big departure from what you're doing, but it's just an incremental step forward in terms of adopting the plate as a means to bring these solutions together. One of the challenges that we've recognized is that we don't allow folks, whether they're residential permit holders or whether they're guests that are coming to Rehoboth Beach, to go online and pay for their parking. These days, generally speaking, folks, it's a ready type of solution, and most folks do sort of anticipate that type of customer service. One of the challenges, again, is that if we were to allow online permit purchases to occur, we still have the challenge of distributing your physical permit. Do they come in to the office to pick it up? Do we mail it to them? How does that happen? But by avoiding the physical permit altogether and using the plate as your means of your permit, that's your permission to park, then we can avoid that altogether. And it makes the online experience a lot more efficient and pleasant for the parker. One of the things that we've also talked with the parking operation about is enforcement. One of the questions that we had was, how many times during a day are we able to get to a certain area and check whether or not somebody's paid for parking? We have some good technology there, right? We've got a mobile enforcement application that allows us to check the validity of whether they've parked or not. So we've got power in our hands. We just can't check a lot of vehicles very quickly. So there's an efficiency issue there. The other aspect of that is we don't really know how much enforcement we're really doing. Are we visiting each area once per day, twice per day, 3 times? We don't really have good measurements around that. So that's one of the things that we're talking about in terms of using LPR to make that more efficient. So this slide just kind of tells you all of the sort of solutions that you have. Again, you're using single space meters that really don't really talk to Park Mobile. So if I want to park in that area, I can use the Park Mobile app to buy parking there, but from an enforcement perspective, I still have to get out of the vehicle to find out if that vehicle is paid or not, or off my bike, or if I'm walking. So again, it's its own individual silo of information. For multi-space meters, you are using the Parkion solution. It's more pay by space rather than pay by plate, so it doesn't interface with LPR. So from a longer term perspective, if you want to adopt more efficient enforcement, you need to sort of move to this idea of using your plate as the way of starting your parking session, which is, can be challenging. I got to go to the pay station, I got to remember my license plate. That's a valid concern, but there's ways around it. You're using mobile payments from Park Mobile. It's a great company. They've been around a long time. They're one of the first in the business, and there are a lot in that part of the business these days. And they work very well with other customers, or other vendors, I should say. And we've been working with them for a long, long time. You use enforcement with T2, that's us. You're also able to go online and pay for your citations. That's convenient. It'd be also convenient to be able to go online and buy your parking permits as well. And your parking solution is homegrown. It doesn't really have the capacity to evolve into providing an online solution. It's not really designed for that. So that's kind of where we're at. In terms of permits, what we see with the industry is that, generally speaking, permits can be housed with citations. It doesn't need to be 2 separate solutions. When you bring in permits with your enforcement data, you can create various rules, like if I have a citation, maybe I can't buy a permit until I pay for that citation. So there's some value in terms of pulling that data together. And obviously from a reporting and a financial perspective, bringing that information together is very helpful as well. When you adopt a solution that is designed to sell permits, or to manage permits, and associate those permits to people, and associate them to vehicles, and citations, and appeals, and things like that, you begin to get a perspective of who your parkers are. And anything that you have in terms of the back-end solution should be something that could be available online. There's no need necessarily for somebody to have to call into the parking office to say, that permit I bought and that vehicle that I registered for that permit, I no longer use that vehicle. I now have this other vehicle. You should be able to go online. I shouldn't say you should, but generally speaking, you can go online and you can do that business yourself. And that would help the parking office, and it would help the consumer as well. And that's just one example of many. Right now, this is Jody's cue to come in and talk a little about pay stations, which is her area of expertise.
So I would like to introduce our Luke Pay Station platform. And both of these multi-space pay stations allow flexibility for your customers, tourists, and current residents when they come into town for parking. With easy-to-use, seamless, top-to-bottom pay flow, which basically means you press the button, you pay for parking, you get your receipt. So very intuitive for your users and for them to get a positive customer experience when they pay for parking. We have been manufacturing our multi-space pay stations now in North America for almost 25 years. Our current Luke platform has been endorsed by customers now since 2002. And what we're allowing and what we continue to do is to add new features to this current platform. Most recently, we added a preferred parking option to our pay station, which would allow the city to extend a discounted rate to the residents that would come into the downtown area if you chose to do that. That's just one option that you can do with a multi-space pay station. Another great benefit to the multi-space pay station is when a tourist or visitor comes into town, they could go to any of the multi-space pay stations and purchase a beach permit. That can be daily, weekly, monthly. Any pay station they choose to go to, they can go ahead and take care of that. Business owners in town can provide coupon codes, which is a great benefit because what they're encouraging is customers to come back to their establishment and spend some money, and the next time that they come back, they can get a discount on parking. And who doesn't like a discount now and then? Restaurant owners can provide validations. Again, you're encouraging customers to come back to the downtown and spend a little bit more money. If a customer decides to stay in town a little bit longer than their current session, so they're having a great time at the beach, they've decided to spend a little bit longer at their dinner, we have an option called Extend by Phone. And what that is it's a text message that would be sent to their smartphone, letting them know that in about 10 to 15 minutes, their parking session is going to expire. Would they like to extend that? And all they have to do is respond with a yes or a no, and their session is extended. It's a great customer service option if they choose to stay a little bit longer. Now you might ask, like my parents, not all of them have a smartphone or would know what to do. That's okay, no worries. With the new multi-space pay stations that we're proposing, they could go to any one of those pay stations and extend their session. They don't necessarily have to go back to where they initially parked. They can use any of the multi-space pay stations in the area. So again, it's all about convenience and a positive user experience.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So that's what we have right now with the Park Mobile app.
Correct. Well, you have a couple options. So you have some pay stations on your boulevard, and then you have the Park Mobile app, which is another mechanism that would allow them to extend their parking as well. This is in addition to that. So not everybody has downloaded the Park Mobile app. So what another option would be is if they don't want to download that app, they can opt to get a text message. So it's just another way for them to pay for parking.
So these, but you interface well with Park Mobile?
Yes, we've been a longtime partner, 10 years. Yes. Does that make sense?
It kind of depends on where you initiated the session. If you initiated the session with the pay stations, then you could extend it through the pay station. If you initiated it with Park Mobile, you could certainly extend it through Park Mobile.
But our pay stations now have a Park Mobile option sticker there where you can do Park Mobile. And that's why I'm talking about uniformity, because someone's going to say, but I did it through my Park Mobile. So is it reading the Park Mobile, or is it going, or they're thinking that, well, I did it through the station? Do you see what I mean? There could be a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
Okay.
If someone starts a transaction with Park Mobile, their only option to extend will be through Park.
Correct.
If someone starts a transaction at the meter itself, they will have the ability to do Extend by Phone.
Correct.
Extend by Phone to us, Park Mobile is a great partner of ours. It's a great application. To us, Extend by Phone is just another option for the customer that may not either have a smartphone or have the Park Mobile application. most pay-by-phone applications are most successful in communities that have a wide presence of that.
But you have an app as well?
We do not have an app.
Oh, okay.
We partner through Park Mobile.
Okay.
With our machine.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay.
But the extend by phone would be for the one-time person that's never used an app before, doesn't care to download an app.
Okay.
And just wants to have that feature texted to them.
Right. When you go to the pay station, you are asked, would you like to provide your cell phone number if you've paid by credit card? Would you like to provide your cell phone number to be notified to extend your parking session? So again, that would be specific to the pay station if you do not have the app. Get a little clearer?
Yep.
I know.
So the pay stations that we currently have are the Luke system or not?
They are not.
And how many of those do we have? Do we know? Do you know?
On your boulevard
We have 97.
okay.
Of the pay stations?
Yes.
And we would be proposing to replace the single space meters that you currently have throughout the town.
Yeah, these are not on Rehoboth Avenue. So we had a 3-year lease arrangement with another entity, and that 3-year lease arrangement has expired with this past summer. So we're looking to replace what we had on the side streets.
Single head.
Now,
No,
I
this is a
think,
multi-space system.
I think this is fantastic, but there is confusion because some meters do this, some meters do that, and
Right.
there's
So we're
something to be
looking-
said for uniformity.
Right,
But
so
just
we're
to
looking to
clarify,
pull the
yeah.
single head meters out and replace them all with pay stations. That's the proposal?
Correct.
But those are not the same as the pay stations that we currently have.
So just to clarify, we
Yeah, I
have
got
4 to 5 different types of technology right now. So depending on where you park, you could have a double head meter, you could have X pay station, Y pay station. So your proposal is to standardize, so we have one technology across the city. No matter where you park, this is what you're going to see, this is what our team is going to know how to operate, correct? Okay, thank you.
To note about T2 as far as who we are as a company. Sure. One thing that's really important to know about T2 and who we are as a company, what we provide and our solutions, as Franklin said before, we really are a platform organization. So we have solutions that can be used in individual situations or individual environments. But if you look at our entire portfolio, it really is a platform of solutions so that you don't have multiple silos of information and multiple systems that you need to use. So the enforcement solution that you use today, as Franklin said, if you added the permit technology and online technology, runs off of the same platform as your enforcement solution. So it's not a new solution today.
Well, I just want to clarify, you're talking about the back end and making it easier for the city. I'm talking about the front end.
Correct.
I mean, both are important, I'm not saying, but I'm talking about the front end, what guests, visitors, anybody who wants to park, see. Right now, they see 4 or 5 different things.
Absolutely,
And
right.
you're talking a consistency in the front end and then interoperability on the back end.
Absolutely, right.
Gotcha.
So, and I think, and on that point, to me, when you look at any type of situation related to parking, you really have to look at who your entire customer base is. You have residents, you have one-timers, you have beach guests that come all the time. And what do you want that customer experience today? Or what do you want that customer experience to be? Today, as you said, you have multiple customer experiences depending on where they go. So yes, for us, it's uniformity on the front end as well as the unified platform on the back end to really balance what customer experience you have and what is best for the city.
And how many parking spaces do we have in the city overall now? I know somebody told me that, the team told me that, I just can't remember roughly.
We have over 1,600.
Okay, and how many of these would you actually put in place to cover those 1,600?
So there's a couple phases, and I know the first is to replace the single space. So rule of thumb is for about every 10 to 12 spaces, you only need 1 multi-space pay station. And that's another kind of big component in this is we're really trying to clean up the green space in the landscape. It's really, this is a beautiful area, and you don't want to necessarily have to see one after another pole. So again, I know the mayor, we talked to you about this last time. Again, rule of thumb is 10 to 12 spaces, but again, depending on what the city chooses to do, that can be extended to more or it can be less. It's really what you decide that you want somebody to walk to get to a multi-space pay station. It's complete flexibility. And by cleaning up the real estate, again, it really beautifies. One of the pay stations, the one on the upper right, That's our new Luke Cosmo. The depth of the cabinet is only 10 inches. So we purposefully did that because we know you have a certain amount of space on a sidewalk. And especially in a beach community, when you have people with their beach bags and their umbrellas, there's not a lot of room on that real estate. So by providing a multi-space that's only 10 inches in depth, it's not taking up a lot of space. And again, only one of those for about every 10 to 12 spaces. Does that make sense?
Can I ask you something? How do we compare and contrast with other beach communities that you serve or don't serve with moving forward? Is this what everyone is doing? Is this, are you seeing in resorts that they're saying, okay, we're actually permitting, we're giving different permits for employees that are year-round? Where are we and where would we need to be in a perfect world?
Great question. Do you want to handle the permit side? Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a, so there's a model. We're going to talk a little bit about the model. The model consists of solutions, but how you actually implement the solution doesn't necessarily, there's no general rule there, right? So you may decide with the flexibility of the permit solution that you provide residential parking in this way. That's your decision because you've done your research, you know what your constituents want, and so forth. Another end destination, locale might do it slightly different. They may offer it for free, or they may provide, so there's different variations on the theme. The model is the thing to kind of keep your eye on and understand the adjustments around what you can do. It's great to be able to talk to other communities to see what works well and doesn't work well for them, which is part of one of the things that we can bring to the table is our
Your clients. Or,
I think to be a little bit more specific to your question, to me, when I look at what you have today, okay, and Franklin used the word talk before about systems, okay? To me, when you look at technology and you look at integrations and different things like that people throw around, okay? To me, what you have today is your systems have the ability to talk to each other, but we all know there's a difference between talking and communicating, okay? Your systems don't really communicate today. So our platform, what we're proposing, what we're seeing our clients do is to have that flexibility in your systems so that they can communicate. Yes, you have a common front end from the pay station perspective. You have a unified platform from the back end perspective. So really what you can gather from that is data to make better decisions. Right now you have many silos of information, and in order to put them together and make good decisions, it's not easy. So one of the things I heard earlier today about the discussion about a parking garage, okay? A decision like that is gonna be made after lots of discussion, but analysis of lots of data. Right now, you can't really put a great handle on, do I have a parking problem or not? Do I have a supply problem, as Franklin showed in that one picture? Yeah, you probably have a supply-demand problem in the main parts of town, but what about in other parts of town? And when you have silos of information, it's very, very challenging to get them to communicate and ultimately for you guys to make better decisions.
have you been before the Parking Advisory Committee?
You guys have talked to them? I mean,
We talked to them, we've seen their recent proposal.
That you've sat with them, you've gone before them?
Not before them, no, just talked to them. Linda, we had talked to Linda.
Okay, because there's a really good committee there.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Where it might be good for you to actually meet with them, I would think.
That would be,
we know Linda from our
Awesome.
prior life. She used to work for us.
Oh, yeah, but there's a committee there
Yes,
too.
yes.
It's not just Linda.
that would
Okay,
be
all right.
fantastic.
So when you talk about how you provide solutions, not just products, will you actually sit with? We have an amazing parking team here, as you know. They're great and innovative, and of course Max as well on the technology side. But will you actually sit down with them and as you know, you can't just implement technology, right? You got to change your processes, you got to have standards, SOPs, that sort of thing. So do you also, as part of your solution provision, sit down with the team and look at other best practices from other installed bases and say, hey, look, standardize parking here, don't standardize it there? Is that part of when you provide a solution, what you
Yeah,
do?
one of the things that Franklin had in an earlier slide is I like to call us kind of listeners and consultants, then the answer to your question is absolutely yes.
Okay.
So I think because of the fact that we don't just really operate in kind of a single point solution type environment that allows us to do that. We can look across the organization and say, okay, what challenge do you have here? What challenge do you have here? What challenge do you have? And to me, as I said earlier, a lot of it just goes back to who are my customers? What experience do I want to have?
Okay.
Again, you have multiple customers, most organizations do. But how do I want to treat, as Jody said before, today, my understanding is if I'm coming to visit the beach and I want a permit, I have to physically go someplace. I have to get that permit. So whether you're starting to offer something online, whether you're starting to offer something at the pay station, those are all the things that we go through and all the steps to understand, okay, what type of journey, what type of experience do you want your customers to have, as well as what information you need internally.
Thank you.
And in addition to that, we provide an in-depth scoping process to really sit down and understand, and luckily, since we've been a partner for 10 years, we do have a good understanding of your current business processes, but there are lots of ways to do different things, and since we do come in contact with many, many customers, such as the city along the coast, we can share best practices. So even though you're doing it this way, we can certainly recommend, have you thought about this? You know, it's all about efficiencies and bringing ideas that will benefit all of you down the road.
And if I may, the T2 team has met with the parking, our parking staff. We do this not just now, but throughout the year, and bringing new ideas forward for the next budget season. T2 is not the only business entity that we've met with, but I wanted to bring T2 in because we find now that they are probably, through cooperative purchasing, the most efficient and best to meet our needs with what we already have. Again, this is a very short period of time for the commissioners to understand this, but this is the new technology that you'll be seeing and hearing us talk about throughout the budget season. It's unlikely that we'll be able to institute this for our next parking season for many reasons, but we need to put it into the budget so at this time next year, we'll be able to implement this for the 2020 season. We will look at, of course, a purchase of multi-space pay stations for those areas that do not have them because we're finished with that other lease. So you'll be hearing from us again, but we did meet in probably at least 2 or 3 different times. The mayor was included in some of those meetings as well. So wanted to just give you a general overall.
It's awesome. And just in preparation, if you think kind of we won't actually be able to do this till 2020 and we'll be in a planning phase, is it possible to bring forward at some point maybe changes to the ordinance right now where we have, I don't know, I think it's 4 or 5 different timeframes for parking. So one street's, 2 hours, one street's 3 hours, one street's 6 hours, one street's 12 hours. So are those the kind of things maybe you'll bring to us in the interim while we're looking at the new
So
technology?
yes, we're doing that. And, much of that is dependent on the commissioner's continuing discussion of what we're doing with parking. So we can't really, take action on that until the commissioners decide where they are. But
So
yes,
as far as permit processing, we're looking at 2020 for that as well.
yes.
Okay.
In addition, I'll just wrap up real quick, and I do want to talk about enforcement because I think that's very important. So and you had asked about trends. So the license plate as your credential is a trend that we're seeing. And by using that license plate as your credential, it really does cut down on your costs. It allows your enforcement team to enforce not only more often, but more efficient. It's easy for your customers. And when I always think about solutions, it's really what's in the best interest of your customer. That's the person you really want to think about. They're coming into town. They want a good experience. We're trying to make it easy, effective for everybody that's involved in parking. So that's the benefit of a lot of our solutions that we're proposing today. Franklin, I'll let you go on.
Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to sort of move on with talking a little bit more about some of the components of the solution and how they come together on the back end.
So in the interest of time, Franklin, I know you all came from Indianapolis, and we do have an executive session planned for 11. There's some other issues on the on the commissioner's agenda, but, and I don't want to cut you off. I know LPR is what we're looking at for the future. So if you can maybe wrap it up in the next couple of minutes, that would be great.
Sure, okay. I'll skip to one of the last slides, I think maybe we'll do it that way. Actually, you know what, I'll probably just end on this particular slide. I think this will kind of maybe bring it together a little bit. So what I have here is the Flex solution is the big the big blue square. And for you all, that would be permits and enforcement. So right now it's enforcement. We would be adding permits to that. So that's your sort of backbone of your parking operation. That communicates to Park Mobile, right? So let me start in a little bit of a different area. So Park Mobile and the Luke Cosmo or the Luke 2 will communicate to one another. So what we would be proposing is putting all of the Park Mobile information into the back-end solution of the pay stations. Okay, and then from a Flex to the enforcement side of the house, so that's the mobile enforcement app, which is already in use today, and the LPR side, those would be also connected as well. So Flex is sort of your backbone. You've got all of these sort of other areas that kind of come back into play, and every piece of information in all of those solutions would be available to you on what we call our analytics. So that all gets into a data warehouse, and then you have the ability to basically report visibly into all of those pieces of information together.
Something that you glossed over that was important to me was the, I guess the LPR. It looks like you have a vehicle, and I saw right before this, it recognizes 100 license plates within
Oh, sorry.
hundreds of plates per hour. So it's a vehicle that essentially goes down the street, because we have guys on bicycles that do that. So this replaces them that's for the permits, not necessarily for the meters, but this would be for both?
It would be for any parking product that you sell.
Okay.
Park Mobile, pay station, a longer-term permit, all of those types of products, whether they're transient or longer-term permissions to park, are based on a plate. And the LPR solution understands what should be on that list and what shouldn't be on that list.
So we have 1,600 parking spaces that currently have meters. Within the city, we have residential parking, which encompasses a lot more. So what would be just a sort of off-the-cuff recommendation for vehicles and how this would be in fact implemented to do the LPR?
So the vehicle itself would kind of leave up to you. I mean, it really kind of depends on what, the city preference would be. The key about LPR, Frank touched on it before, is it's a major shift in kind of your enforcement philosophy. So now you're basically saying, I'm going away from permits, I'm going away from a space. The license plate is the key.
Right.
Okay? And I would say, 99.999% of cars you're going to see a plate on, okay? I
Right.
did actually see one recently. There was a piece of cardboard that somebody wrote on, okay? The camera's not going to read that. But, so it's a change in your philosophy of how you enforce, okay? The way the vehicle works and the way the technology works is essentially the operator is telling the technology that they're entering a different zone or a different place to enforce. So if they're going down the main drag, they're looking for a certain type of individual. They're looking for a scofflaw. They're looking to make sure that plate is paid for that meter or through Park Mobile, through that technology. If they're in a residential area, they're basically looking to see, okay, is that a residential permit holder or not? So the technology and the enforcement officer are working hand in hand to kind of know where they are. And again, you have many different areas. You're going to be down by the beach. You're going to be residential. You're going to be, on-street parking. So the technology is smart enough to know where am I, what am I looking for, and then what kind of violator am I finding. So it really is. It's just extremely efficient way to enforce parking.
And what we have now is, it works, it's worked for many years, but it is not efficient. So we have one staff person who spends months on issuing parking permits to residents.
Is there, maybe this is a question for Glenn, is there any privacy issues that we deal with this type of recording people's license plates?
I don't think so. You see, if it's not distributed somehow, I mean, if it's used, and typically people are submitting to it when they use the system, so there's probably some amount of acceptance of the technology and all that. So, no, I don't see any liability that could flow to the city for using this sort of thing.
Well,
Their technology, I'm sure they vetted it, on their end.
You will have people bring up that question, but from a liability perspective, there's not.
How portable is the equipment? Can be used on a bicycle, on a scooter, on a golf cart?
Golf cart, yes. Bicycle, scooter, no. It needs to be something that's got some hardiness to it.
It needs power source as well, a really reliable power source, and not something that kind of bounces around.
Power as in off of a battery or solar or battery?
Right. Yeah, part of it is not only the camera that you see here, but there's physically a laptop device that the enforcement officer is interacting with. So as Franklin said, from a durability perspective.
If they're driving along and they get a hit, it will pre-populate on a laptop in that vehicle connected to a printer. So the enforcement officer, if they deem that license plate is not paid or there's a soft law associated with it, they will get a hit on that screen, they can print it out, ticket, go ahead and place it on the car. And it's all about compliancy. Again, they will be able to enforce an area probably 6 or 7 times more with LPR versus prior. So talk about efficiency, and again, it's compliance. It's making sure people are paying for their parking or their permits and moving on if and when they're done.
Your goal isn't necessarily to issue a lot of citations. You could do that, or you could decide not to have a very heavy hand when you start to get all this data. But the end result is that people will begin to pay for parking. And so they're not in a stall where they haven't paid, and they're not using up a stall where somebody could be paying. We want to open up some stalls so they're available.
Yeah. Encouraging that turnover, which businesses are very happy about because those are people hopefully coming into town, buying something and leaving, and then making room for the next person to come in to
sharing that
purchase something in
space.
town or enjoy your beaches.
Do you have the technology to move people to different areas? Seriously, no, there's hotspots. So this happens and prices go up and they go down. This is.
Oh, I see. So dynamically adjust pricing. Okay, I was going to say physically.
No.
Yeah, but that's the idea of the data that you get to collect. You get to determine maybe that in the core, that's a higher amount.
Go to the third block now, it's a discounted price.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
That's the goal.
That is the goal.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
so much.
you coming here.
We've got just one last thing on here. I know the city manager had sent you all out something about a grant application for surface water matching planning grants. There were 2. These grants need to go in on Wednesday.
Yes, Mayor. Mr. Miller has been working on 2 separate grant applications. One specifically for the drinking water matching planning grant is due November 7th, Wednesday. And in order to move this forward, included in the application needs to be a resolution from the commissioners. So we're talking to you about it now, and hopefully we'll get you some consensus on it later in the day. I'll turn it over to Evan.
Yes. Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the public. So just kind of reiterate, one of the grant applications that the city's been working on is a drinking water matching planning grant, and that's through the Department of Health and Social Services Division of Public Health. The grant has a maximum funding potential of $100,000 with a 50% match contribution. However, the city is submitting an application for a total project cost of $65,000. The city's match would be $32,500, which could be budgeted in the next fiscal year annual budget. Just to kind of reiterate what was mentioned in the attached application, the city's requesting the matching funds for a water facility study. And this is going to evaluate the city's existing potable water system from basically the production wells through treatment, distribution, and storage as it relates to existing and future water demands. This information would also be mapped and converted or imported into the city's GIS database, as well as Google Earth. And it's going to be helpful ultimately in the future with proposed developments and improvements required due to those developments. So again, the city would put up a 50% match in the amount of $32,500. And we need an adopted resolution by the Board of Commissioners prior to submitting the application on Wednesday, November 7th. So it's up for your discussion at this workshop meeting, and then it could potentially be adopted at the special meeting at 1 o'clock.
Just to clarify, so part of this project and the funding will go to putting this data into the GIS?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Good job.
Question, and I'm incredibly supportive of moving these grants ahead and getting involved in this study, if for no other reason, just as very important, needed prevention of our water supply system, particularly given what's going on in other parts of Sussex County. I see the letters giving a notice to our neighbors in Lopen Acres, Dewey Beach. What, and I'm asking this just out of ignorance because I'm new up here. Why do we not ask them to participate in the cost of the match?
And they actually have asked, we have asked them. So they're partners, we're the lead in this grant application, and we're partnering through that with Dewey and the county.
So they may participate in the costs?
Yes.
There's actually there's two separate grant applications. One would be, which I'm not discussing today, is the surface water matching planning grant. And that's related to a lake management plan for Silver Lake and Lake Comegys. And that would be a partnership with Dewey and Sussex County. This would not be a partnership with Dewey or Henlopen Acres. We were just asked within the grant application that we provide them with a notice that we're pursuing these planning activities. It's strictly just to let them know that we're interested in these planning activities.
Thank you.
But in order for the application to be submitted, it has to come from the water facility or company, and technically the city of Rehoboth Beach, having the water department supplying the water, has to submit this grant application.
Good. Thank you, Evan.
Let's vote on it next month, our next meeting.
Next meeting.
Next meeting.
You were asking for a motion
At
today?
which is at 1 o'clock.
Yes.
To clarify.
Were you asking for a motion right now to move this
No,
ahead? After the 1
I think
o'clock?
it's just consensus.
so you're discussing it now at the regular special meeting.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, adjourn this and then open this.
Good job, Evan.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done.
Okay. With that in mind, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. We are adjourned, and we're going to open up the 11 o'clock meeting, and I need a motion and a second to go into executive session.
So moved.
Second.
To what?
Is this Walter Birmingham, 123 Henlopen Avenue? Is this two separate items on the agenda or one?
One item.
One item.
So what's wrong with the public knowing about the rules of freedom of information? I can understand the second part if you're going to talk about some specific properties or something, but what's wrong with the public being able to hear what you're being told? Because basically you're going to discuss rules, are you not?
Rules?
I'm not sure I'm following, Walter.
Well, after you get done 29 Delaware, et cetera, 6, and then you go into the discussion about sales and rentals of property, et cetera. I think the first part is one thought, and I think the second section after that.
Well, the reason they're related is there's a confidential document that relates to the second portion of it, so.
I can well understand that if you have something specific, but it gets pretty broad, because if you're going to discuss how you can then preclude us from having the right, because I don't know what you're going to discuss about no rentals, AT&T, et cetera, I encourage you to protect the rights of the people to know, because I don't trust y'all to let us know and step aside and say we have to stop discussing this. Thank you.
Can
So under that section that's cited as the first one, there's